Thank you very much. I want to welcome you back to the Loved Ones group in terms of the sessions we're providing on information on how to be able to help someone who has a drinking or a drug problem. We've been talking about a lot of different things over the past few hours in terms of looking at addiction as a disease, how the disease progresses, the whole experience of someone hitting bottom and making a decision that they want help, and again looking at that whole definition of hitting bottom as a point in time when someone is willing to ask for help. It's not a particular place, it's different for all people. We know that there's a lot of different pathways that people take when it comes to drug and alcohol addiction, and we know that there are different pathways that people take when it comes to recovering from alcoholism or drug addiction. And so what we're going to be talking about now is we're going to look at how effective people have been as loved ones in making changes in their behavior, how those changes have allowed the consequences of drug and alcohol addiction to shift from the family to the person who has the addiction. And that becomes the real key to all of this. We know that in order for someone to recover, they have to hear the truth, and they need to hear that truth most of the time in a way that, is easy for them to hear, which, generally comes, from someone that's not necessarily being angry or not someone who's being judgmental, but in terms of being able to share the truth in terms of let's expose this whole disease of addiction. We know that addiction survives on secrets. And it's not only the secrets that the alcoholic or addict has, it's the secrets that the family is keeping. The family has over a long period of time, most of the time it's over a long period of time, has kind of become conditioned to the idea that the job of the family or a particular member of the family, that person we call the rescuer or the primary enabler, their job has been to try and protect this person from the problems that are occurring. Focusing not so much on the alcohol or drug use, but instead of the problems that have been created by the alcohol or drug use. And again, part of that has become, again, a secret in terms of what is happening within the family. And when we start to see these secrets exposed, where family members start to say, look, I need to ask for some help, I need to talk to someone about what's going on with my loved one, that's the beginning of real change. And because what we see then is that people start comparing notes. You hear information from another family member that's dealt with something like this, and all of a sudden you start to notice, this addiction's everywhere, and it's affecting, almost every person in some way or another. And when we expose this disease, all of a sudden it starts to lose its power. It also enables us to be able to start shifting these responsibilities of these consequences, to the person who's creating them. And that's the way they're going to recover, is to be able to hear the truth and then be able to experience the consequences. I don't know anyone that's ever recovered simply because they heard the truth. It would be wonderful if an alcoholic or addict could be loved into recovery. We wouldn't need the Loved Ones group, because every addict or alcoholic has been loved by someone enough, that would propel them, you would think, into recovery. But that's not how it happens. We also know that you can't reason somebody into recovery. If that was the case, then I would be extremely successful as a counselor in terms of just sitting down with someone, telling them the truth, explaining the disease, how it progressed, and they would say, well, thank you very much, I'll quit drinking and quit using. It doesn't happen that way. That's not the way this disease works. And the main reason it doesn't work that way is because of the experience, again, that we've talked about of denial. As the disease progresses with an individual, so does the denial process. I heard someone say just the other day in describing denial, it stood for, don't even know that I'm lying. And that's the case. The person, as the denial process grows, again, the person has developed this web of secrecy, web of rationalization, justification, and blame of others and other circumstances. Plus, the disease is working on the individual to all the time tell them, that it's not because of your drinking and drug use that this problem is happening. It's because of somebody else isn't doing what they're supposed to, or it's bad luck, or something that has, that distracts away from the person's problem with the chemical. So as we look at secrets and denial, we start to see that overlaying a person's ability to get well is this, almost like a fog that the family experiences, and definitely the person with addiction experiences. And then we also know that one of the real hindrances that we start to see is that family members experience a dilemma in terms of loved ones find themselves performing a role when it comes to addiction. Now, when we're married to someone, we know that there's maybe a certain amount of role involved in being a husband or a wife, but we really want a lot more about relationship. That's really what we're wanting. We're wanting to share with that person, make plans. We want there to be a balance of responsibility. We want to be able to mature as adults. If I'm a parent, I know that there's a lot of role that goes along with being a parent, but as a person grows older, we want that role to diminish. We want to be less of a parent as that person becomes 15, 18, 25 years old. We want to enjoy more about relationship with that person. But what happens with addiction is that it causes families to get stuck in role. It causes spouses, it causes siblings, it causes parents to get focused only on their role. That is where you will hear family members by the time they come to loved ones group saying things like, the only time I ever hear from my loved one is when they need something. Yeah, they need something. There's something that I'm supposed to do for them. And that role, again, becomes a very powerful and a very painful part of loving someone who has an addiction. Because what we see is that we start to try and interpret, well, why is that? Why does my loved one only come when they need money or when they're in trouble and went out of a jam? And we start trying to figure that out, and because we're probably dealing with it alone, we're not talking to other people about it, the answer we start coming up with is that, well, maybe my loved one doesn't care about me, just doesn't care about how I feel, doesn't have any love for me. Or maybe they're, incapable of loving. Maybe they're just, a no good person for, the way that they're treating their family. Because we don't know that we're dealing with a disease. We don't know we're dealing with a sickness that's causing all of these symptoms to exist in terms of this role and relationship. So when we start talking about how does someone recover from addiction, one of the things that has to happen before someone recovers from addiction is that this role has to be addressed. It has to essentially come to an end as much as possible. It definitely has to change. That's where you might see a spouse making a decision that's married to an alcoholic or an addict, making a decision saying, I'm not going to call the boss when they can't go to work and explain their behavior away. I'm not going to make excuses to the kids for the way that they're behaving. I'm not going to perform that role. That's not what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be the person that protects, my husband or wife from what other people think or whatever people say. Another part of that role might be, I'm not going to be the one that stays up all night hearing and listening to problems, because we know that alcoholism and drug addiction loves to do that. First of all, one of the things that happens to someone with a drug or alcohol problem is that we become extremely self-centered, selfish and self-centered. But that self-centeredness, I think that you want to stay up all night with me talking about my problems. I think that you really enjoy that. I think that, there was a line in the movie Beaches where there were two actresses were talking back and forth, and the one had been talking about herself for about an hour. And she says, okay, let's quit talking about me, you talk about me. And that's kind of the way addiction likes. It likes the whole focus to be there. So part of the role might be for a loved one to say, I'm not going to participate in those. I'm not going to be the person, that performs that role any longer. Again, a parent might say, I'm not going to be the one that bails you out of jail. I'm not going to be one that gives money. I'm not going to be the one that does these things. I'm not going to come and get you. I'm not going to pay the utility bills. So that role, if it doesn't come to an end, then what we know is that a person will not recover until they have experienced a problem that is beyond the family's ability to fix it. That becomes the real dilemma then, is that as long as the family is stepping in and fixing the problems, dealing with the consequences, assuming the consequences and the pain that goes along with those consequences, the person's not going to recover unless they finally get into a problem that the family can't fix. Those are pretty big problems. Those problems can sometimes be huge. So what we're suggesting here is that if the family will quit performing these roles earlier, then the consequences that are smaller can be the very thing that leads somebody into recovery. A person doesn't have to end up living under the bridge or homeless, or doesn't have to lose everything to recover. In fact, what we see is that the majority of people who are recovering have not had that kind of an experience necessarily. So what we're looking for is the ability of, for loved ones to now be able to draw back from that role while trying to focus on the relationship. It doesn't mean that we quit loving people. It doesn't mean that we quit caring. It just means that I can't do this any longer because it's not helping. The intention was to help. But when it comes to addiction, those normal ways that families help get turned around and they support the continuance of the disease. So family members want to try and recapture this. That's going to be a theme of what we're going to talk about over the next few minutes, is family members being able to recapture relationship while at the same time moving away from the role that they played when it comes to addiction. Now, one of the things in all reality that we know that happens is that there is usually a period of time when a family member quits performing the role that they also don't have a relationship. Because what did the parent say when they call me? The only time I hear from them is when they, well, if I'm not doing something, if I'm not giving something away, then they will have to turn. Out of survival, they will have to turn to others to try and find somebody that will perform this role. That worries family members a lot of the times. It's like, well, if I don't help them, I know they'll just go to another relative or they'll go to these other friends and they'll just get what they need from them. Well, that's part of the process too. Because one of the things that we see is that kind of like that second string, if we're talking about like a baseball analogy, the second string, they may step up and help, but they're not going to do as nearly a good job as the first string. Again, that first group of players that perform this role, they've got it down and they know how to do it. The people that the addict or alcoholic goes to later and says, hey, mom, dad, grandma, whoever won't give me money, will you? They might get money that time, but that next enabler, that next rescuer is not going to do this role the same way that the first group. They're not going to do it for as long or as well. And so that becomes a consequence. It becomes a real consequence that can help someone to recover. So again, we want to recapture relationship. Now, when we start talking about how does someone recover, let's remember that we've talked about this experience of hitting bottom, again, which is not a place, it's not the same for everyone, it's very different, but it is a place where someone is trying to make a decision. And it is not a good place. Now, when someone has recovered, they will go back to that day, and they will describe that day as it was like I was at my very worst and something good happened. In other words, I got in trouble people couldn't get me out of, or people had drawn away and quit fixing things, and all of a sudden the consequences landed on me, and I had to make this decision. It was a terrible day. I've never heard anybody describe, getting sober, that first day, that decision, as being some kind of remarkably wonderful day. Because it was at the worst. It was when the consequences were really being experienced. So as a result of that, we have to look and realize that the beginning of recovery is a difficult time. It is a struggle. It's a struggle for the family because the family's watching this. If a family member has pulled back and said, I'm not going to get them out of jail, I'm not going to pay that bill, I'm not going to do this, they're feeling terrible because, they know that some bad things are about to happen. Consequences are about to befall their loved one. But at the same time, we know that's the only way that anybody gets well. That's the only thing that leads to recovery. So when we start to look at how does it happen, how does someone make that decision, the very first thing that happens, probably long before anyone ever decided to quit, is they decided to control. That's the first step. This was long before any of your loved ones that you probably even knew, maybe they even had a problem. An alcoholic or addict will start trying to control their drinking or drug use early on. And that may be very something as simple as, they're drinking on the weekends and they say, this is an appropriate way to drink. You work all week or you go to school all week and then you drink on the weekends. So they essentially set down some rules for themselves. Addicts and alcoholics all the time are setting down boundaries for themselves. Oh, I smoke some pot, but I would never take a pill. Or I may take a pill, but I'd never put a needle in my arm. You know, I'll drink beer, but I'd never drink whiskey. You hear all of these kinds of boundaries always being established. But again, the family members don't know anything about it because it's usually happening inside the thought process of the person who has the disease. And again, only an addict or an alcoholic has to exert control over their drinking or drug use. Normal people do not have to exert control. They don't have to. Normal drinkers, people who drink socially, they don't have to exert that kind of control. They don't have to sit down and say, here's how many I'm going to drink, here's how often I'm going to drink, here's how I'm going to drink so I don't lose my job. They don't do those kind of things. Only people who have this problem, and that starts very early on. Trying to control will evolve over time to all kinds of elaborate plans. Well, I'm going to quit drinking and just smoke marijuana. That's called the Marijuana Maintenance Program, and it is historically not a very good plan. It doesn't work. People who are crack cocaine addicts may say, I'm going to quit crack. That's when all my trouble started. I'll just drink. You know, I have trouble when I drink whiskey. I'll just drink beer. You know, I got to get off these pills, these narcotics, this painkiller stuff is really causing all kinds of problems. I will give up that and go to something else. So those are all efforts to control. And what the addict's trying to avoid, trying to put control over, are the consequences that are being created by the chemical. Kind of reel it in. Is there some way for me to build a fence around this so that I can live in some type of reasonable happiness with my drug addiction? And as we remember, you know, the person is constantly remembering that wow experience that they had, that they were able to especially get in the early stages and maybe the early middle stages of their drinking. They were able to get that very powerful, wonderful experience that was manageable and seemed controllable, but now is going out of control. We will also see people do all kinds of other things to try and control. We've heard of geographical changes. Family members frequently get drawn into these. It's not my drinking or drug. If I could just leave this town, if I could go someplace else, then I could, this is the problem that I'm having. It's all these friends I'm having. I'm going to change friends. I'm going to change town. I'm going to change who I work with. I'm going to change relationships. It's this marriage. It's this. We call those geographical because the person is thinking it's the circumstances I'm living in. And usually family members are drawn into that in some way. Well, I need to change schools. Will you help pay for this new school? I need to come home. Will you pay for me to come home? I need to live with you. I need to move away from you. All kinds of ideas and plans to try and fix this problem that really has nothing to do with where the person lives or where they work or the relationship they're in or even who they're hanging out with necessarily. The old story that the alcoholic tells is I kept going places trying to solve my problem, and it took a long time before I realized that everywhere I went, I took me with me. And that was the problem. They're essentially saying it was a problem that was internal to them, and it had nothing to do with that. But a way of trying to control are those geographical changes. And family members frequently finance those, get drawn in to support them. Get drawn in to kind of put your stamp of approval. Here's what I'm going to do. It also might be a part of the bargaining. An addict or an alcoholic who is trying to control their use does a lot of bargaining. Can I live in your house under these circumstances? Will you pay for this if I do that? And family members are wanting to help. They think that there's an opportunity here, to be of help and to see some change. But what they frequently find is that there really is no change because the drinking and drug use is continuing. So control can go on for a long time. A person trying to do all kinds of different things to control their drinking and drug use. At some point in time, the person may make the decision that we're all kind of watching for, and that is to quit. Usually the first efforts to quit's done in secret. That's a lot safer way to quit because there's nothing worse than somebody walking up to you in a bar saying, I thought you quit drinking. If you're an alcoholic, that's just like the worst, So, a person will usually try the quitting idea, and the quitting idea may have a couple of different forms. One may be is I'm going to quit until I can get some of this heat off, or until I can get my finances straightened out, or I can get my family feeling a little bit better about me, or I can get out of trouble with the job or the legal system. I'm going to quit, but it's not a forever kind of thing. Another thing that the addict or alcoholic may not know is that quitting and then restarting, has no effect on the disease. If an individual makes the decision to quit and manages to quit for a few weeks, a few months, and I've known people who've even quit for maybe a few years, once they start drinking again or start using drugs again, it's out of control. It's out of control again. And we even hear stories where the disease seems to progress even when the person is not drinking or using. So you hear somebody that was maybe drinking, most every day, having a lot of problems, decided to quit. A couple of years later or a year later, they start drinking again, and it's as if they never quit. Now they're drinking every day. They're drinking all the time. It has progressed on them even though they weren't drinking or using. But the first effort to quit will generally be kind of a private thing. I'm going to quit, try to get things straightened up, and with the idea that I can resume this again at some point. Quitting might also involve a promise, and it might involve a promise to you, that I'm going to quit. If I quit drinking, that means that it's kind of like where you pay off all your credit card debt. You got all this credit card debt, and you pay all that credit card debt off. What can you start doing then? You can start accumulating more credit card debt. So quitting and telling a family member that I'm quitting can have kind of that effect on the family. It's like, well, our loved one has quit drinking, quit doing drugs, and they're doing really well. And they've been quit for 2 weeks or 2 months, and that's like the credit card gets wiped out. So then I'm coming to you, and will you help me fix my car? Will you pay this bill? Will you give me money for this? I'd like to go, I want to enroll in college again. It's like we get to start all over. And so family members frequently talk about quitting, getting a promise. We start the whole promise thing over again, start the whole cycle again in terms of accumulating, perhaps debt or promises or hope, and then it all kind of falls apart again. It all unravels again. The next thing that will happen is that we will see that someone will quit with a plan. The problem with this is it's going to be the addict or alcoholic's plan. And a person who is affected, impacted by this disease, their thinking, their judgment is tremendously impaired, is not going to develop a good plan. Now, there might be parts of this plan that make some sense. I'm going to quit drinking, and I'm going to quit hanging around with my old friends, and live here at home with you, Mom and Dad. And that's my plan. And then a good plan. And again, family members are usually pretty desperate for some kind of plan, some kind of positive movement, and not knowing that, that plan has a couple of good elements in it maybe, like not hanging around with the old drinking and drugging friends might be a good plan, but it doesn't contain the other elements that are necessary for someone to be able to quit. It's too limited. And again, generally, any suggestion about, have you thought about maybe going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? And there's where you're going to see denial crop up again. It's like, I'm not that bad. That's for people who are really bad shape. Or I don't need that. Or I don't like groups. I don't know of any sick alcoholic or addict that likes groups of sober people. Those two things don't go together. I like, the same person saying I don't like groups, they might love to hang out with 100 other people down at the local bar, and they're very social, very outgoing. I love all these people. But it's not groups they have a problem with, it's sober groups. It's people who are not drinking, who are alert and able to focus in on the denial of what's going on. So again, but you will hear these objections. Well, how about treatment? Well, I'm not that bad. I don't want to talk to somebody. I don't need that. I can't afford it. You will start to hear, again, barriers placed up. And for the family, it's really a tough time. This is a tough period. It's again, from my standpoint as a counselor, I know that controlling, trying to quit on my own with the idea of starting again, and quitting with my own plan, I know that all has to happen before anybody can really get into recovery. I don't know of anybody that ever skipped over any of those steps. Anybody that ever recovered did all of those things. So from my standpoint, I can say this person is making some movement toward recovery. But for the family standpoint, it's a very painful time. It's a very difficult time because again, hopes get built up, while at the same time the family may know that, I'm just not sure that how this is going to work. The other part of this problem with this plan is that, if you made a plan on doing something and it didn't work a couple of times, you'd probably change your plan. The sick addict or alcoholic will wear this plan out. They will keep coming back to this plan over and over and over and over again. Because again, one of the things that happens as a result of addiction is it affects the way a person thinks. So that denial process keeps me from being able to see that my plan isn't working. In my mind, as the person trying to quit, I'm thinking I'm just not working it hard enough. I made that decision to stay away from my friends, and I did that for a few weeks, and the next thing I know, I was hanging out with one of them. Well, now the next time I'll just do better at that. Because what the person doesn't recognize, the addict can't recognize, is that they are powerless. And we talked about this word before. Powerless is not weakness. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean that I'm weak. What powerless means is that I'm growing more and more unable to control what happens when I drink, how much I drink, what happens when I drink, but I'm also growing more and more unable to think logically and develop a plan in terms of how I'm not going to drink. So this powerlessness is becoming stronger and stronger all the time, to the point to where this plan, even though it's not working, I can't see it. I can't see how the plan's not working. Or I come up with, my logic tells me that the reason the plan's not working is because somebody else messed up. The family did this, I was doing really well at quitting, and then, my wife just kept nagging at me about something, and I got mad and went out and got drunk. That's the way it seems to the addict or alcoholic, even though that's not what happened. What we know is that, again, trying to recover from addiction is not an easy thing, and it requires a lot of help and a lot of support. At this point, the person doesn't know that. The one thing that can finally move us off of this point is failure, whereby the consequences are experienced by the person who's failing. Again, as long as the family is experiencing the consequence of this plan not working, then the person will just keep trying the plan over and over again. Had someone come up to me in the loved ones group a few weeks ago, and they were talking about their loved one had called them on the phone, and they heard the plan, which had been a plan a number of times, and it always involved them. It always involved their money, their resources, what they were going to do. I'm going to move back home. I don't have a driver's license. I'll need you to do this for me and do that for me. And they responded differently this time. They said, I really hope your plan works, but we're not going to participate in it. Nothing, and again, and that was different than, because what they'd been doing before was attacking the plan. They were really arguing with the plan. Here's why that won't work. You've got to go to AA meetings. You've got to get some help. Your ideas just aren't working with this. But they didn't do that this time. They just essentially said, you know what? I'm rooting for you. I care about you and I'm rooting for you. I hope this works for you. But I'm not going to participate in that plan, because your plan does not include treatment. It does not include meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. It does not include the elements that this person had become educated about that meant a plan that had some chance of success. So the failure of this plan's okay. Again, what the family wants to try and do, a goal that the family has, is to try and get out of the way of the plan, so that when it doesn't work, it doesn't affect you. It's not your consequences. Bad things aren't happening to you because the plan isn't working. And again, especially when you know what kind of a plan will work. Let me stop there and just see if there's any questions or comments before I go any further with what we're talking about so far. Yes.
To change the role, that's kind of all you've known for a while.
You know.
You think of it as a relationship.
Yes. That's the statement was that it looks like it would be really hard to change this role, because it's what you think of as relationship. You think that is the relationship. And again, that's kind of the starting point. The beginning point for a family member is to be able to start looking and trying to divide these things into. What should a relationship be with my 30-year-old son or daughter? What would have been my goal for this relationship back when they were 10 years old? I'm thinking, okay, well now you're 30, I hope that you're living independently, that you're taking care of your own family, that those would be the things that you'd be looking at in terms of that relationship. And then to kind of say, well, what is it really though? What has happened? But you're right, what has to occur first is a family has to start really thinking in terms of, what has this disease done to my relationship? How has it how has it captured me? We've used the word hostage before. The disease has the addict hostage, but it also has the family member. And so we have to start really evaluating, what is it that I do when there's a crisis? What is it that I'm asked to do to support this person's consequences? And what would I like my relationship to be? And when a family member first asks that question to themselves, they start to realize, while this person is as sick as they are, caught up in their disease as much as they are, I might not be able to have much relationship right now. There might be a real limit on what I can have. But again, for us to continue to think that unless this happens, this person is going to get sicker and sicker and sicker, and the consequences are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, where we have the ability to perhaps shorten that happening. Or, as they talk about in recovery groups, raising the bottom so that a person doesn't have to experience those severe consequences. But it's a very tough thing. It requires a family member to go through quite a bit of self-analysis. And it won't happen with the whole family. Most of the time, if you've got a family that might include several family members that are engaged with this person, frequently what we see is that one person starts to make changes. One person starts to make some changes in that family. The rest of the family might not go along with it. They may stay right in the role that they've always played. They may even put pressure on the family member who's trying to change to get back to doing the things that they've been doing. There might be pressure from all kinds of people. But again, that becomes kind of the starting point, is one family member saying, I'm going to start dealing with this differently. Other questions, comments? Yes?
I just have a comment. During that really hard time, groups like Al-Anon can be very, very helpful.
The comment was in terms of during this time, as this thing is playing itself out, the role that Al-Anon has. Again, family members become powerless too. The addict or alcoholic is powerless over alcohol. They cannot not drink, and they cannot control what happens when they drink. Family members are in the same position. They may say, well, this all makes sense, but I don't think I can do that. I don't think I can tell my loved one no when they call up asking for money. I don't think I can say no when I see that they're struggling, and I can do something to change that. And again, that is exactly for the same reason that we want to see people find their way into 12-step recovery groups for recovery from their addiction, is the same reason we would want family members to find their way into Al-Anon, because it is there they're going to find the support to be able to start saying no to these things and understand that it is absolutely the most loving thing that a person can do. Again, to stay in this spiral of things getting worse and worse, continuing to help rescue, guaranteeing that every rescue means that there's going to be another crisis that's bigger and worse, to be able to step back from that and say, I'm not going to do that anymore because I love this person that much. I'm willing to sacrifice them being angry at me, maybe not having a contact with me, other family members not understanding. That's a real tough place to be if you're the one family member who's trying to change and the rest of the family thinks that you're actually doing the opposite. You're just trying to be hurtful, that you're not caring, you're not loving. And that's not what you're doing. Again, to do this is one of the most loving things that you can do. And Al-Anon can help you to say no, can help make those changes. Any other questions or comments about what we've talked about so far? All right, well, what we want to get to is the next one. The next step is quitting with somebody else's plan. That's what works. It's when the addict or alcoholic reaches a point, again, always because of consequences, always because of truth, where they're willing to be open-minded and start to take suggestions of other people. And again, not to be concerned about, I had a family member just recently say, well, I think that the only reason that my loved one went into treatment was because they got in trouble with the legal system and the probation officer gave them a choice. That's all right. That's okay. Again, I don't know of anybody who came into recovery that did not have something biting at their heels. There's always, these consequences are what move a person into at least starting to make some motion toward recovery. It's always that way. If it's not a legal system that's helping move someone, it's problems at home or problems with an employer, or it can be internal things like or probably AA says it the best, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. But there's always something that again is the motivating influence that helps someone, start the process. And remember, they're very sick. This person is very sick. Their thought processes, their thinking, it's not working right. And because it's not working right, then we can't expect them to say, well, here's why I'm going to start recovery. I want to have a wonderful life. I want to quit hurting other people. I want to get an education. I want to get a great job. I want to be a responsible parent. That might not be it. The reason they may start the recovery process will be, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to be homeless anymore. I want to be, I can't get enough of the drug to stay out of withdrawal. I just don't want to be sick all day now. So, these are the kind of reasons that people recover. And again, it's the very kind of things that you hear when somebody hits a bottom. That's the kind of things that they're experiencing at that point. And again, there is that knowledge that I am not going to get rescued here. No one is going to step in and remove these consequences. I'm going to experience these consequences. And so there's this open-mindedness that comes. Now, 12-step recovery programs start to talk about a word that's real important, and that's the word surrender. And that a person will surrender. But again, that rarely happens day one. Surrendering is usually a process as well. Sometimes family members who may have a loved one that's in early recovery says, well, I just don't know if their motives are right. Or I don't think they're doing enough. I hear that there's a lot of things that they should be doing. It seems like they're not doing very much. But again, that's probably pretty normal as well. That whole surrendering process is essentially a point where the person gives up on their old ideas, where I completely give up on my plan and I'm hearing this other plan. Parts of that other plan are kind of hard to hear. There's some things in there that they perhaps don't want to do. But again, that becomes the beginning place when a person is willing to start developing a plan of recovery that's somebody else's plan. It's somebody else essentially telling them, here's what I did to recover, or here's what you need to do to start this process of recovery. And what we know is that's going to be a struggle. It's not something that just a person quits. Again, television shows that talk about, recovery from addiction and all that kind of stuff, the dramas, they've got an hour to show this whole thing. But I can guarantee it doesn't happen like that. I can remember watching a TV show one time and somebody at the end of the show, this family member was making that phone call to Alcoholics Anonymous. And the credits rolled, and it was like everybody lived happily ever after. I'm sitting here thinking, this person's just getting to the starting line. This is how it begins, but there is so much more that happens after that. An area that the experience of addiction and the being an alcoholic or an addict places you in a position where you are locked into this denial process that we've been talking about. And also there is this attraction to the chemical, whether it be drugs, alcohol or some other drug. And what we see is that oftentimes an individual is creating consequences that they are experiencing, other people are experiencing, well before they're really willing or wanting to give up the chemical. In other words, the chemical has a great power over them. So it's kind of like this balance system. If the person is getting this wonderful feeling from alcohol, loves the way it makes them feel, loves the lifestyle that they're experiencing because of that, and there aren't any consequences, then the love of the chemical is going to be so powerful that they're not going to consider quitting. They might be looking at controlling, but they're not going to consider quitting, because the question would be, why should they? They're getting this wonderful feeling from the chemical. Now, that can be counterbalanced if consequences start to happen. A lot of people who come into recovery today still are getting some positive from the chemical, nothing like it was at one point in time, but now they're saying, I don't necessarily, I'm not, sitting here saying I don't like getting drunk or I don't like getting high, but here's what happens when I get drunk or high. I get in legal trouble. My family's, leaving me. I can't hold a job, or I can't work up to, the standards I've set for myself in terms of employment. So, these consequences are starting to outweigh, and there becomes a tipping point for folks. Now, again, other times what we see is that and this is another thing about addiction that's just really kind of a very deceitful thing that addiction does. But what happens is that the enjoyment, the pleasure, that wow experience of the chemical gets very elusive. The person can't get drunk or high the way they used to with that same feeling of enjoyment. And you would think, well, that would be the time that a person says, well, I'm not getting a great feeling out of this anymore, I'll just quit. Well, and again, they might think that, but what they find is by the time that has happened, and again, here's the deceiving nature of addiction, by the time that the good experience of alcohol or drugs has left for the alcoholic or addict, they have now become addicted, physically addicted. Their body now has had this adaptation to the chemical, so when they think about not drinking or not using, they start thinking about withdrawal symptoms, feeling abnormal. And Alcoholics Anonymous uses a phrase for this person, and they talk about the person has reached a point where they cannot picture life with alcohol or without alcohol. In other words, the world looks pretty bleak. Again, if I keep on drinking, these bad things are going to keep happening to me, but I also can't imagine being able to quit. Or I can't imagine what my life would be like if I quit. Remember, we talked once before about addiction is a condition eventually, not in the beginning, but eventually is a condition of joylessness. It is a place where the person has finally got to where the only relief they get from their joylessness is perhaps that few moments that they get when they start drinking or start using, when they satisfy the withdrawal symptom or that little bit of high that they might still get. But the rest of life looks pretty joyless. And this is a time when family members and others have to be pretty careful because, you might try to give that person hope by saying, if you would quit drinking or using, you could get a job. Maybe might not be much of a job, but you could get a job, and you could get you a little apartment, and you could do this, and you could do. And the person who's hearing those things, which might sound like pretty wonderful things, you could take care of your kids. They might be thinking, oh my God, is that what it's going to be like if I do quit drinking? Is because those things that bring great joy to normal people have reached a point of joylessness for the person with an addiction. So when they think about working a job, paying their bills, taking care of their kids, cooking it on the grill on Sunday afternoon after going to church, that stuff may sound horrible. Just absolutely horrible. Because they've known for a long time that those events do not bring joy. And why? Because that's what addiction has done to them. Addiction has taken the joy out of the normal, wonderful things that life has to offer. And this joy will not come back for a while, even after they quit drinking. Even after they quit drinking, that joy will not just instantly return. That's what makes the early stages of recovery so difficult. I heard somebody say one time, the worst year of my life was my last 6 months drinking and the first 6 months sober. That was the worst year. And what they were talking about was they quit drinking or quit using because of all the consequences that it was creating, and they had enough open-mindedness that they moved into a recovery process, but going to work and paying bills and raising kids and doing all this other stuff was not bringing any joy yet. It wasn't doing anything for them. And they may have even been attending, AA or NA meetings where they were going in and seeing roomfuls of people that were just happy, and they were happy and joyful, and they were wondering, what's wrong with me? These people are all happy. But again, one of the things they'll find in an AA meeting is someone will say, yeah, but you're not going to be happy for a while. You got to wait. Got to wait on this a little bit. And again, probably one of the themes for everyone when it comes to addiction is how well can you wait? The family member who says, I'm not going to enable anymore, I'm not going to rescue, I'm not going to bail this person out, I'm not going to support them in their addiction. You would hope that the moment you stop doing that the next day they would say, hey, I need help, I'm going to go to treatment, I've started going to meetings, but that's not what's going to happen. There's going to be a period of time where you're not engaged with that person in terms of those rescuing behaviors, but they're also not recovering. The same thing happens for the person who quits drinking or using. They may quit, but all of a sudden it's a matter of when will things get better? When am I going to start experiencing the joy that comes from doing the normal things of life? And you will hear that reported by people in recovery. People in recovery will report that a lot. They'll say, you know what, I got up this morning and I've been sober for 3 or 4 months and I was driving to work and I noticed and I thought, what a beautiful day. I hadn't noticed that there were flowers and trees were blooming, And again, they will report that it's kind of a waking up. It's a waking up. Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous calls that a spiritual waking up, that their spirit is coming alive again. In other words, joy is starting to come back and be able to be experienced for these normal things that life has to offer, which are wonderful things, but they have not become wonderful for the person who has an addiction, because again, that's the nature of addiction. So this waiting process becomes very difficult. Anybody that recovers from addiction, the first thing they have to experience is withdrawal. Whether or not they get help in a hospital or they do it on their own, they're going to experience a real difficult experience with their body. Their body is going to reject this whole idea. They're going to experience craving, they may be sick, there could be all kinds of things that their physical body goes through. And while their physical body is going through that, the brain is pretty much like, in some ways like a computer, and the brain's job is to get you out of pain. And so if you put your hand on a hot stove, your brain says, get it off. If you start to put your hand back, the brain says you shouldn't ought to do that. That's called learning. And the brain, that's what it does all the time. So you're going through withdrawal, and you're experiencing tremendous craving, joylessness. What is your brain going to tell you? Keep it up now. Don't drink. Everything's going to get better. No, you don't have that message in your head. The message you have in your head is, just get high. Take a drink. You'll feel better. You'll be okay. So again, the brain, our own thinking as a recovering person, is pretty well useless in the early days of recovery. That's the reason it's so very important to engage the help of other people. And a person is going to need that kind of help. Now, when a person has made a decision that they're going to get help, what is the family's role in that help? And again, this may sound a little strange, but the family's role in somebody getting help is as limited as possible. The least, the best when it comes to this. Again, if somebody calls me on the phone and says, I'm trying to get my 30-year-old son into treatment, my first question is, why isn't the 30-year-old son calling me? Again, why? Because this person's role is to pave the way, to fix things. And so they're trying to continue to do that. Again, we have to shift that responsibility. The person needs to be taking as much responsibility as possible. Actually, if a person is moving into recovery, what you want to try and do as family members, as much as possible, is reclaim the relationship, but get out of the role. You're not there to fix, you're not there to worry. You're not there to be the recovery police. Aren't you supposed to be going to a meeting today? Isn't tomorrow your counseling appointment today? Don't forget that you're supposed to do this. You don't want to be in that role, because the more the family does to try and help somebody recover, the less the person will do to recover. And if they don't fully engage this process at some point in time, they will not recover. So the family, when someone is making some movement toward the recovery process, really needs to be very careful about the kind of support that one provides. An example was a parent that came and said, my daughter's going to NA meetings and going to treatment, and it's wearing me out. And I said, what's going on? And she said, it's absolutely wearing me out, because I'm watching her kids, I'm driving her to treatment, I'm driving her to NA meetings every night, waiting outside with the kids in the car and waiting for her to come out, and it was like, wow, who's recovering here? You're doing more than your loved one is. But what was it just a matter of is, again, it was hard to give up that role. And you will not find an early recovering addict talking you out of your role. They won't do that. If you're willing to do all this stuff for me, again, just because I haven't been drinking for a few days or a few weeks or even a few months doesn't mean that all of a sudden I've healed up in terms of how I'm treating and dealing with other people. So it's not unusual for somebody who's in early recovery, especially with their family, to really just drop right back into that role. Oh, you're worrying about me, you're willing to fix this, you're going to take care of this for me, I'll let you. And again, the problem with that is that a big part of recovery is growing up. It's growing up. We want this individual, this person who's in early recovery, to experience all the wonderful things that you know about. You know about these things. These things have to do with self-esteem. When you think of what you have in your life, what's going on in your life, you think, well, I've worked for what I have, I've accomplished certain things, I've worked hard, I've had to go through some tough times maybe to make things happen in a good way for me and my family. We want that to happen for this person too. So if you're taking care of me, what's happening with my self-esteem? It's not progressing. It's not progressing. I need to grow up. And you might think, well, I can't, my loved one, I can't imagine them going down and working that job at McDonald's. Well, maybe that's exactly where they need to be working. Maybe that's what they'll get that feeling, where I've accomplished something today. I've done something that was hard. And I went to an AA meeting and didn't have any transportation, and I found a ride. I found somebody that would give me a ride to the meeting, and they gave me phone numbers of people to call. Those little things are what accomplishment leads to higher self-esteem. The person will start feeling good about themselves. If the family wraps themselves around this person who's in early recovery, kind of doing everything for them, worrying, paving the way so that everything will be smooth, they won't recover. And you might think, well, I'm removing barriers. We're giving them a car, we're doing all this other stuff, but it doesn't work that way. The mother that came to me, what we decided is that she went to her daughter and said, here are the days that I'm willing to watch the kids. And I'm going to give you a ride to one more meeting, and then from that meeting, you've got to get your own rides to the meetings. And again, that's very easy. That's part of how the 12-step recovery programs work, is that people engage one another for help. What we essentially know is that this individual, our loved one, needs a lot of help. What we don't want to do is that we don't want to be the primary helpers, because the recovery process means the person needs to start getting help from someone else, whether it be a counselor. We know that in AA and NA there is a role of sponsor, which is going to be a guide, and they need to ask someone to be that sponsor, and that sponsor starts being the person that they talk to. If you're still having those late night conversations about how things are going good and bad and all that, that's not your role. Your role is not to be their counselor. Your role is not to be their sponsor. Your role is to be their loved one, whether it's a parent to an adult child or a spouse or whatever it may be. It's not your role to be there essentially guiding their recovery process. It won't work. They will relapse because they've got to grow up, and they've got to grow up kind of quick. We talked before about how when someone starts using drugs, that their emotional maturity stops. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't progress in lots of other ways. They may be very intelligent, they may have great business skills, they may have all kinds of talents, but their emotional maturity stops. And the reason for that is because alcohol and drugs become the way that a person learns to cope with anything that goes wrong in life. And so you don't learn skills because you're not learning those skills as other people do. Well, they need to learn them now. It's got to be a kind of a crash course, and it's nothing that the family can direct. Now, again, they will start getting help from these other people. Trained counselors in addiction, sponsors in AA or NA will be very direct in terms of helping them maneuver through this process where they can't trust their own thinking. In the beginning, they can't trust their own thinking, so whose thinking should they trust? Family members don't know what this recovery process is about. They've not seen it, don't know how it happens from day to day, so it needs to come from outside. But don't be surprised if the person, the recovering person, the newly recovering person, is still trying to hook the family into the role. Money, transportation, worry, whatever it may be. It's not unusual to hear a sponsor talking to a newcomer in the program and saying something like, quit going home and telling your wife all your problems. You've worried her enough. Quit going home and telling mom and dad about all this stuff that's going wrong. They've had their turn worrying about this. Now it's time for you. That's the kind of direct messages people get in recovery groups about this whole growing up process. In 12-step recovery or in counseling, people will also receive education about what is the recovery process. After a few days, am I well? Sometimes people think that after they get through the withdrawal process that they're essentially home free. Narcotic addiction is especially bad about this. People think that I've got to get through this first week and then after that I'm okay, thank you very much. Not realizing that this process is a process and it's going to take a while. The recovery process, early recovery, is really the first year, in my opinion. That we're talking about a year where there's going to be a lot of changes, a lot of ups and downs, and this person needs direction from someone who knows about that. That knows that when after 3 months and they're talking about I'm having trouble sleeping at night and what's this all about, that somebody's able to say to them, that's normal. Went through that, been there, done that. This is a normal experience for recovery. When somebody's talking about all these resentments that start popping up or anger and these kind of things, they're able to say, that's normal and here's how we're going to deal with that. So that recovery process becomes very dynamic. And if we talk to 100 people who have recovered, they would tell us 100 different things about how that happened for them. There would be certain things that would be the same. They may have engaged in treatment. Again, some people don't. Treatment can be helpful, but it's not absolutely necessary for everyone. We see people going into 12-step recovery groups that do very well. But if they go into those 12-step recovery groups, again, they will start talking about they got a sponsor, they went to a lot of meetings, they became active in working the 12 steps of that program. We won't go into detail here about what those 12 steps are, but again, it's an actual program of recovery, spelled out very clearly about certain things that a person does. And a lot of what that's about, it is about growing up, it's about taking responsibility, it's about cleaning up the wreckage of the past and starting a new life in terms of being able to experience things very differently. And also being able to recapture this, find our way back to where joy is available to us. And again, what we will see is, as a result of that, is that we will start to see a person will start to change. And that's what family members really need to be most focused on. You're wanting to see change. If the person is not drinking or using, but they're doing everything else pretty much the same way, you find yourself in these compromising positions all the time, being asked to do things you're not comfortable doing, the person being dependent upon you for their food and their payment of bills and money and gasoline for the car, transportation, then things aren't progressing. Things are not moving, and you have to really be willing to look and see, am I really helping this person, by essentially, trying to fix all these things for them. Another thing family members want to avoid is feeling like you have to walk around on eggshells. A lot of times family members are all the time saying that, well, I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing and they're going to go out and drink. You can't say the wrong thing. You really can't. There's nothing that you can say, that one way or the other that's going to affect whether this person takes a drink or doesn't take a drink, or use a drug or not use a drug. It's not about that. Now, again, if you find yourself continuing to rescue and enable a person in early recovery, that can contribute to them relapsing. That can be a big contributor to that because the person is not making any real progress and they will revert back to the drug. And since I mentioned that word, let's put it up here. Relapse. This is a disease. We've been talking about it because it is a disease. And what we know about any disease is it can recur. It's not unusual. If somebody's had cancer, it's not unusual if that cancer returns. If somebody is diabetic, we know that there are symptoms that escalate. There are symptoms that happen over and over again, and there's things that a person has to do to deal with those. Relapse in terms of drinking or using again is not an unusual experience for somebody who is recovering. It's because somebody relapses doesn't mean that they're not recovering. What it means is that perhaps that there are things that they haven't been doing or haven't been doing enough, or just the whole process of coming to grips with that issue of powerlessness. And we also know that powerlessness will cause somebody to take a drink or a drug even when they don't want to, even when they have 100 good reasons not to. This relapse phenomena can still happen. But relapse, if it is accompanied by the consequences that occur as a result of the relapse, can be a wonderful teacher. It can help that person to discover, what is it that I need to do differently? What did I make? Have I been leaving parts of this program out? Has there been advice that I haven't taken? And again, I don't know of anyone that walked into their first AA meeting or walked into a treatment center that said, tell me the 100 things I need to do and I'll do them all. It's not like that. Again, this person's trying to fight out of their denial. They're trying to fight out of their sickness that their disease has caused for them, and they're struggling a lot with being able to embrace, what is it that I really need to do to quit? I'm going to give up my plan, but what is it about your plan that I can do, and will it work, and is there a reason for me to have hope? And the family is not the one that can instill this hope. I mean, I know you would if you could. But the family members are not the ones that can tell somebody, that everything's going to be okay. If you keep doing what you're doing, everything's going to be okay. This hope has to come from people who have recovered themselves. It has to come from somebody that knows that path, that knows what it feels like to feel bad, that knows the fact that I had to wait on certain good things to start happening for me. And sometimes it was a matter of just putting one foot in front of the other, trying to do the right thing the right way in order to get to that next opportunity for things to get better. Probably everyone's heard the phrase one day at a time. That becomes the real focus, of course, in terms of people staying sober, especially in the beginning of recovery. But to be able to develop that daily program of action requires the input, the advice, and the support of people other than the family. The family really cannot provide that for their family member. Let me stop here and just see if you have questions or comments in terms of what we've been talking about so far. Yes.
My loved one just entered a recovery program, and I'm not really sure what or how much I should be doing to help.
How old? Young?
17.
Some loved one just entered a recovery program, a teenager. Now, one thing about teenagers is that a couple things. First of all, we know that adolescence is a disease unto itself. We've talked about that before. And of course, so that means that there is a natural amount of kind of, I don't want to do this, I don't have a problem, it's, you know. And the other part of being an adolescent is that, again, it's a little harder to draw boundaries. You know, with an adult, you can essentially kind of say, I'm not responsible, you're going to have to deal with this problem yourself. With an adolescent that's living in your home, that's a different experience. The boundaries are not as clear in terms of what you can or cannot do. But one of the things that we know is that probably the first thing to look for in terms of anybody that started some kind of a program is what action are they putting into it? What are they doing becomes the key. You know, what interest are they showing? What motivation are they, you know, are they demonstrating to people? Are they taking some kind of action? If you find yourself doing most of the work, then you're doing most of the work, and the other person's not doing that much of recovery. So in the beginning, you know, with anybody who's starting the program, but especially somebody who's really young, your expectations need not be high. You need to be realistic in terms of this might be the point where they're hearing the truth from somebody else for the first time. This might be the place where they're hearing about how you do recover. Now, they may reject that, and you have to be willing to realize that if they reject that, of course, they are going to use again, and that the consequences need to be right there, and that that there's still reason to be hopeful, because we know that as they experience more consequences, then they start to become more willing themselves. Let me kind of say the difference between motivation and willingness. Motivation is what gets everybody to the treatment center or to their first meeting, AA or NA meetings. It's what gets somebody started. Willingness is what keeps people there. And I heard somebody one time make this statement. An old-timer was talking to a newcomer, and the newcomer asked the person who'd been around a long time, how long do I have to go to these meetings? How long do I have to attend these meetings? And the old-timer said, just until you want to. Now, that's the difference between motivation and willingness. There will reach a point to where the individual will want these things that are being recommended to them. But again, we don't know how long that's going to take. And we know that the way you get from one point to the next, in other words, a person might go to a counselor and the counselor says, I'd like you to go to an AA meeting. And the person says, well, I don't need that. So they were willing to go, they were motivated to go to that counselor, but they weren't motivated to go to the next place. Well, maybe the next consequence. They drink again, they get in trouble, they come back to the counselor says, here's what I recommend, and maybe at that point, because of that new consequence, they're ready to make that next step. And again, it's a very difficult thing for families to watch, because you got somebody that's got this much interest, and it's got to grow to be at least this much before they're really going to make progress. But it will happen, and it can happen. But again, those consequences being experienced by them and not you is the real key. And they can jump over. Sometimes it happens pretty quickly for people. You see people who have a very limited amount of interest. They're doing the very least possible. Well, they relapse, and it gets bad very quickly in terms of some kind of consequence, and they make a lot of progress very quickly. But again, it's always related to that consequence. Other questions or comments what we're around this area? Yes?
I know you said that you shouldn't call for an adult child, but if you have a teenager involved and you think they might need treatment,
the question being if should the family member kind of step forward and take the responsibility if they're dealing with an adolescent. First of all, the parent's probably going to have to be involved if they're dealing with an adolescent, because they're going to have to sign papers, going to have to do all that in terms of giving permission to treat that the adolescent can't give. But it would still be a good practice if the adolescent could make their own phone call. Now, family members frequently, one of the things I do with family members in the loved one group is I give them my card, and I say if the opportunity comes to be helpful, give this card to your loved one, because frequently when your loved one might want help, who are they going to come to? They're going to come to you. And again, you're not the one that can really provide that help, but you can say, I can't do it, I don't know what to do, but here's somebody that can help you. Here's a phone number, here's an organization, that might be able to help you. And then try to go ahead right from the beginning and let that person start taking as much responsibility as possible. Again, the more you do, the less the newly recovering person will do. Not because they're thinking that way, it's just the nature of the disease. Other questions, comments, where we are right now? Okay. Again, one of the things that we want to kind of focus on as we kind of come to a close to this is that the recovery process is a very dynamic process. It's something that, again, if you're watching very closely, can cause a lot of discomfort, a lot of stress on family members, even somebody who's getting well. And my experience is that the last place a person gets well is with their family. Again, there's a lot of there's a lot of history, there's a lot of old behavior, a lot of old habits, a lot of ways that people interact with each other. So it's not unusual for somebody who's in early recovery that might be doing well at work, they might be doing well in their 12-step recovery groups, they're making new friends. People have a real definite opinion over here about them that might be very positive. But when they walk back into the home, it might be different. In the home, they might be full of conflict and a lot of anger and a lot of complaints. One of the things that happens for, again, a newly recovering person is they're waking up. They're not just waking up to being sober, but they're waking up to a lot of stuff that they've kind of ignored for a long period of time. They've ignored things around the family. They got a lot of guilt. There's a lot of shame. There might be a lot of resentments, a lot of anger about certain things that hasn't been dealt with. And oftentimes the family becomes kind of the brunt of that, unfortunately, because it's kind of the safe place to where that can kind of come out. So again, if somebody's dealing with somebody in early recovery, it's going to require a lot of patience and tolerance and continued education on the part of the family members, or they'll think that this person's actually getting worse sometimes. Sometimes it can look in a very dynamic way like the person is having more anger and more resentment, more fear and all that they ever had before. But again, what they're doing is they're dealing with life on life's terms now without alcohol or drugs to buffer between them and the world. And again, it's a very dynamic and difficult time. When I use the word recovery, here's what I mean by it, and this is the goal. And this is the reason that if you were running a treatment program and a loved one of mine came to your treatment program, here's what I would want you to tell them. There might be 100 different ways to recover. Might be 100 different ways. But the way I know that works is for somebody, again, to be able to counseling, I think, can be very helpful. It can be very educational. It can provide a safe environment for people. It can be a good place where they can get introduced to the other services and the other things that are available within their community. I also would, recommend it to my loved one that they find their way to AA or NA in terms of 12-step recovery groups. So again, that's what I talk about because that's what I believe really does work, for people. But for me, recovery is when the desire to drink or use drugs is removed from the person. They do no longer desire to drink or use drugs. Again, it's not one of those cases where somebody is going to be fighting this thing for the rest of their lives. I don't know anybody that would fight something for the rest of their lives. And alcoholism or drug addiction won't just go away. Again, it just won't go away on its own. We know that one of the most dynamic times in recovery is between 3 and 9 months. It's not necessarily just the first 3 months in terms of somebody can stay sober for 3 months, they're home free. Not really. The first 3 months are important, but the most relapse happens between 3 and 9 months for people who are, again, making some kind of real effort. A person that's gotten through the withdrawal process, it's that 3 to 9 month period. And that's when they're trying to engage life again. They're trying to get their life back, and they're facing these difficult things, in terms of how do I deal with the stress of my job without promising myself to get drunk at the end of the day? How do I deal with these kids without being high? How do I do these normal life things that really aren't bringing much joy right now, but people tell me that they will? How do I work this little job? It's the only little job I can get because I've gotten fired from so many, I can't get a better job. Those are the kind of difficult things that people have to deal with. It's important for growing up, But we also know that the only way that a person's going to stay sober is if the desire to drink or use drugs has been removed from them. And the only place that I know that that's guaranteed to happen is in 12-step recovery programs. They can make that guarantee, that that's what will happen if a person truly engages themselves, gets very involved, and takes the benefits of all that those programs have to offer. Any closing questions or comments anybody has? Well, if not, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate your participation. I'm very glad that you were able to be here and take part in the Loved Ones group. And again, one of the most important things that we can always remember is that there's always reason for us to be very hopeful, and a lot of our hope will be tied directly to how well we are able to apply some of these principles and wait for them and have the patience and the trust to let these things show the benefits that they are able to make. Thank you very much for coming.